Welcome into another edition of the 5 Reasons Podcast. My name is Chris Whittingham. Without Ethan Skolnick today, he is actually taking a mini vacation, a well-deserved mini vacation as we continue to ramp up to the launch of our website. Do whatever it is you kids do with websites nowadays, and that is bookmarking, or, you follow us on Twitter. You find all of our tweets at 5 Reasons Sports. Follow us on Instagram there as well. We have a lot of great content as we launch next week our brand new website. Check it out, 5reasonsports.com. We are almost ready for launch. We should be ready in about a week's time. So April the 1st, not an April Fool's joke. We will be bringing to you our website. But today, I've been interested in this subject for quite a long time, and I feel like we'll continue to hit on it as the summer goes on, as we ramp up to college football season with the University of Miami first game against the University of Florida. That weekend before college football actually launches now. August 24th is the date of that game. But the new Miami and everything that Manny Diaz has done, we had a great episode that we did a few weeks ago with Zach Krantz, who recommend you checking that out as well, on what the University of Miami is becoming under Manny Diaz and all the changes that have happened as well. And just in general, for me, the positive outlook on this University of Miami football program compared to when we're leaving the season. We're leaving the season after getting hammered by Wisconsin, after losing some embarrassing games. I'm trying to talk myself into them being good, and I still think they had a decent defense, and that's all, a credit to the head coach now of the team, Manny Diaz. But the offense was just so appalling over the course of the year that you're kind of leaving without hope, because Mark Richt was theoretically going to stay the coach, and he wasn't really going to change that much, it would have appeared. But clearly something happened, and there was a mind change somewhere in the program. They decided to change coaches, and now the turn in the outlook, even if it doesn't necessarily lead to immediate results, to me, the thing that most stands out is that you have a guy in Manny Diaz now that kind of looks like he's one of these up-and-comers in the world of college football. Took a bump at Texas, but at Mississippi State, and now here at the University of Miami has really repaired his reputation. Now as a head coach, and I think is doing some of the things, is laying some of the groundwork that you've seen laid at the other major schools, the other major programs like Clemson and Alabama, and things are happening to this program that, Mark Richt brought some of it, but it's kind of been taken to a new level. And we're going to be joined now by Andrea Kremer, who is a terrific journalist for HBO Real Sports and has long time covered the NFL. She's actually a Pro Football Hall of Famer, and also we'll get to as well. She actually had the chance to be part of the first ever women-only commentary team for the NFL, joined Hannah Storm in the booth as the analyst for the NFL Thursday night games on Amazon Prime. So we'll talk to her about that as well coming up. But we obviously spend the majority of the time talking about her piece that she's going to be doing for HBO Real Sports on the new Miami, on Manny Diaz, and everything that's going on in the program. It'll air Tuesday night. If you're listening to this March 26th, maybe you'll listen to this after the Tuesday that it airs. And then if you miss it, or you listen to it afterwards, then you can check it out on HBO Go or HBO Now, or obviously you can find the re-airs of HBO Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel. So Andrea Kremer is going to join us now on the podcast, talking some Manny Diaz, talking about his journey towards the University of Miami, his journey through his career, and also we talk about his Abuelita, which is one of the more amusing parts of the piece that Andrea Kremer did with Manny Diaz, is kind of taking her through his backstory and everything that happened in his life. So Abuelita is prominently featured, and for any of our Miami listeners would certainly be well familiar with that. So let's go ahead and get to Andrea Kremer, who joined us on the 5 Reasons podcast. Joined now on the 5 Reasons podcast by the Pro Football Hall of Famer, Andrea Kremer, who's covering Manny Diaz on the next episode of Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel on HBO. Airs Tuesday. If you're hearing this on a later date, it is March 26th at 10 p.m., of course, available on all these streaming platforms, HBO Go, HBO Now, if you have those as well. And Andrea Kremer has kind of take some time today. Andrea, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. How are you?
Doing great. So I want to start with what was your inspiration for doing a story about the University of Miami football program and the work that Manny Diaz is doing?
Well, if you're familiar with Real Sports, and I know you are, we're always on the lookout for really good stories. And for us, a good story has to have a pretty high bar. And I think this one does because there's so many, as we like to say, there's so many layers to this story. This isn't, for us, it's not a story just about your new, local head coach. It's a story that really, in some ways, reflects Miami, given Coach Diaz's background and not just even the Cuban-American connection, his dad being the former mayor. Just there's so many different connections and so many different layers to the story, and it makes for just a really, really compelling tell. And I think that you get a sense as to who he is as a person, and you get a sense of the whole family. I've heard from several people who've already gotten a chance to see the story that their favorite character is his grandmother, Elisa, who is the one that came over from Cuba in 1961. She's terrific, and we got really great cooperation from the entire family. And I think it's a fun, interesting story, and really gives you a pretty good sense as to who Manny Diaz Jr. is as a person, more so than a coach.
What did you learn? What I would presume would be her known by her nickname, which would be Abuelita. She strikes me as she strikes me very common Cuban Abuelita here in South Florida.
Right, exactly, and she kind of the one thing that I liked about Abuela is that she doesn't hold back. She is very sassy woman, especially at the ripe young age of 87. And she's got a very quick wit and a quick smile and a very quick laugh. And she will let you know that she is not psyched that her Cuban-American grandson basically knows two words of Spanish, abuela and abuelo, which is grandmother and grandfather in Spanish. She makes that pretty well known. But yeah, she is so. Look, these kinds of things get overused quite a bit. The American dream and things. But you know what? If a family really does epitomize that, I believe it's this one. I mean, here's this woman who came over. She literally says that she had 10 cents in her pocket. Her husband was imprisoned under the Castro regime in Cuba, and her son goes on to become the two-term mayor of Miami, and her grandson is now the first Cuban-American head coach of the University of Miami Hurricanes. And really, this is truly only in America. But I just think that just hearing their stories and hearing them tell it, and the connection between the father and the son, and growing up this massive Hurricanes fan, and look, the dad was divorced, and the kid would see his father only every other weekend, and they really bonded over football. And so, Junior basically witnessed 4 of the 5 championships that the Hurricanes won, and he remembers those heydays. And as he's toiling away for 20 years with 6 different cities, I don't think he's ever really thinking, well, I'm going to be the one to come back and hopefully be able to rekindle what we had in over those 5 championships. And it turns out that he is, and he's got that ahead of him.
Now, one of the interesting things about the Miami program is that for the longest time, when outsiders were pitched for the job, it was always, no, we want someone who's come through the UM program or has a connection to the community. And I think fans really feel that sense of, even though there are a lot of fans that didn't even go to the university, but have always kind of felt that the Miami Hurricanes are Miami's most Miami team, if that makes any sense. And I feel like one of the things that will be covered in your piece is Manny Diaz's connection to that aspect of Miami fandom and understanding what the Miami Hurricane program is all about. How did he articulate it in your view?
Yeah, undoubtedly. He understood the swagger that was there in the 80s and the winning and things of that nature. And also, I think that both father and son have a really great perspective on what the Hurricanes meant, not just in the college football realm, but really to the city of Miami, which, look, in the 80s, crime and drugs and racism and you name it. I mean, it was struggling. I remember actually that vaunted Time magazine cover that said Paradise Lost. I mean, Miami was in sort of dire straits, and in come the Hurricanes, and really reflected kind of the celebrity aspect and sort of the danger aspect and things of that nature. That's sort of how history paints, quote unquote, the U. And then not having won a championship since 2001, obviously it fell off for a variety of reasons, at least of which are all self-inflicted problems. and NCAA violations and things of that nature. And look, it's never easy to win, but it's really not easy to win when you have set yourself back with transgressions the way that the program did. And to be able to come in to understand the connection to the city. I think that's one of the big things that Manny Jr. had, was really understanding what that connection is all about. While also remembering that, look, he left here in 1991 when he started, believe it or not, a career that he thought was going to turn him into a sports writer or a sportscaster. And when he ends up coming back in 2016 to be the defensive coordinator for Mark Richt, he had been gone for all that time, but certainly had always kept an eye on Miami. But by that time, he'd had almost 20 years of becoming seasoned as a journeyman assistant, really working his way up. And but yeah, he definitely understands what University of Miami football means to the city of Miami.
He wanted to be us, Andrea Kremer. He wanted to be what we're doing. We're talking about sports, we're covering sports, and I imagine some of that background, and he's talked about this before, and wanting to, including on one of the fellow podcasts in our network, about wanting to work in the media career, and also being able to learn his sort of beginnings of his coaching football career from some of his colleagues at ESPN.
Exactly, and I don't want to give it away just because it's so crazy. There's a connection between Manny and I. He actually was the production assistant on one of the shows I worked on, and I kind of had mentioned it to him, when you see somebody, and you just want to try to make them feel comfortable. Oh, we were both at ESPN at the same time. And then he did something that reminded me of it. And I'm not being cute by not telling you what it is, but you have to see it to believe it. And let me say this, Chris. It is 100% real. I was completely blown away by what he remembered and what he did. So that was kind of interesting and amusing. But look, I think that it's just so strange because he, I don't think it's in our story, but he told me about being on a shoot in 1997. He was a production assistant with Sterling Sharp, who was the former great Green Bay Packers wide receiver who became an analyst at ESPN. And they're down at the Super Bowl interviewing Bill Parcells before the Patriots-Packers Super Bowl. And he remembers just listening, Manny Jr., remembers listening to this interview and just having this sort of visceral reaction. I don't want to go on television. I want to be a coach. And of course, you're sort of sitting there like, yeah, right. And, I also want to be a fashion model, that type of thing. So but he remembers it. And this is very, very strong for him. And the first, perhaps this, but when he made the decision to do so, to try to climb the coaching ladder, he basically couldn't even get a graduate assistant job at Florida State, his alma mater. He ended up basically going into the football office, licking stamps and stuffing envelopes. That was it. But as he said, and that's pretty much probably all he was qualified to do at that point, but as he said, it got him in the building. And once he was in the building, he just had this insatiable desire to learn about coaching and to learn, obviously he knew about football, but learning it and knowing it as a broadcaster or as a journalist is definitely going to be different than learning it from the coaching level. So he had some terrific mentors along the way that were able to nurture his desire to learn, and then he followed them as he started ascending the coaching ladder, all these different teams over 20-some years.
Now, his introduction to the University of Miami, I kind of want to start, or in terms of being the head coach, obviously was defensive coordinator here for a few years, but in terms of becoming the head coach, a couple of questions along the way of that. First off, that process that brought him here, it brought him back after he was briefly the head coach at Temple. What kind of light did he shed on that, and how difficult that is to kind of go back on something, particularly when, as you know, every new coach that comes in gives this whole big speech about what he's going to bring to a program. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, and I'm incredibly proud to be the head coach of blank university. And Manny Diaz gives that speech, and then 3 weeks later he kind of has to renege on it and go back to the team where he just came from. What was that whole experience like for him?
Well, I will say this, that my knowledge of all this is obviously coming from him. I haven't talked to people at Temple, and so that's always my kind of little disclaimer. what I think is really interesting is that when he took that job, obviously Mark Richt was completely ensconced as the head coach. And even though there was sort of a feeling that if there was going to be an heir apparent, it would be Manny, but there was no sense whatsoever that it was going to be imminent. I mean, it could have been 6 or 7 years that Mark Richt was still at Miami. So when Manny took the job at Temple, his first head coaching opportunity, that was all in. However, the Temple contract had a $4 million buyout because Temple had been down this road before, even with Al Golden, with several other coaches, where they came in and it wasn't a placeholder, but it was a stepping stone. It was a building block to a coaching career. So Temple has this $4 million buyout, and because they're kind of serious. If you're going to come here, we're going to make it difficult for you to leave, and somebody's got to really want you. So at 12:30 in the afternoon on the day that Mark Richt resigns, Manny gets a call. He told me the story. It was in our interview, but we didn't get a chance to put it in the story. He was actually interviewing a prospective offensive coordinator for Temple, and the guy had flown into Miami. So here they are, and his phone is kind of blown up, and he finally looks, and it's some text messages from his wife. So of course he thinks, I better check this because this could be from regarding one of our 3 children. He calls her, and she says, Mark Richt resigned. And then sort of the world sort of stopped spinning on its axis. At that point, Manny realizes, this could be an opportunity. And I knew that what I said to him was, how could they possibly negotiate this buyout so quickly? And that's when he said to me, the buyout was in the contract. So that saved a whole lot of time. And then there was some machinations back and forth between Temple and the University of Miami as to when that $4 million buyout was going to be paid, because that's a lot of money to be just sort of like hanging around your program.
Sure.
So, and the one thing that Manny made clear to me is he said to Miami, look, I'm not going to hang Temple out to dry. They've been good to me. They hired me. I'm not going to leverage that. I don't want to, just string them along here. So we need to make a decision if this is going to happen. And 5 hours later, that decision was made. So it was pretty amazing how quickly it all came together. And what Manny said to me is that, look, Temple, I mean, were they happy? No. But did they understand? Yes. Because this is the only job. This is coming home. This is your childhood team. This is the team that obviously where you just came from. And they understood. And he didn't prolong it. And I think that's with all due respect, this isn't Josh McDaniels leaving the Indianapolis Colts at the altar just because he changed his mind. I mean, this is I feel like this is a different situation, and I feel that, Manny Diaz comported himself as professionally as possible because it's a long life, and you don't want to be burning any kind of bridges, and I don't think that he did.
And at the same time, you don't want to be letting opportunities go. And yet, since he's taken over, you've seen really, first off, sweeping changes that have come through in the organization, ones that I think went even a little further than I might have expected. But the other thing, too, is you've seen him develop this persona, particularly on the internet, of the way that he's trying to portray the program. He calls it the new Miami, and he's, cleverly using social media and activating, the transfer portal, this thing that we've never really heard of before. But in terms of that character and that persona of the program, obviously I would imagine that comes with a degree of intent, but how would you describe the way that he's gone about trying to image build both for the program and for himself?
Well, I think that, it's interesting because with respect to the portal, Lane Kiffin sure didn't agree with him on that. But so it looks like Manny Diaz is certainly not going to be afraid of taking anybody on. That's for sure. But look, I think that when you have a program that's in flux, and look, he takes over the defense in 2016. By 2018, it's second in the country, overall defense number 1 in pass defense. And, defense is always going to set a tone for a team, right? Especially when he came up with the idea of the turnover chain, which, as he described to me, is really just a Cuban link, But that's supposed to kind of conjure back up sort of this image of this rough and tumble Miami team that we really haven't seen in almost 20 years here. So you hear coaches say this all the time. I want to establish a certain culture. I want to establish a certain mindset. So defensively, he's got the cred. Now he's got to come in and he's got to figure out the quarterback situation. He's got to figure out the offense. He, certainly has that is clearly a work in progress for him. But if he can establish a certain type of player, a type of vibe that he wants around the program, and tries to hearken back to the glory days, I think that he feels that it is going to set a tone and be a successful program sooner rather than later.
All right, Andrea, just one more before we go about you. Obviously, again, check out the piece when it airs Tuesday night, which is March 26th, or available on the HBO streaming platforms after the episode airs, and obviously on re-airs on the HBO networks. You had the chance to actually commentate on some games this year for Amazon Prime for the Thursday Night Football package. How was that experience, and would you expect to do it again?
Well, it was not just a few games, Chris. It was an entire slate of 11
right.
games. Hannah Storm and I became the first female commentating duo for a major male professional sport. I'm the first female NFL commentator and analyst. And I guess we did pretty well because Amazon renewed us 7 months early. We were renewed in November. Pretty proud of that because that's a vindication, and it's a feeling of you done good, and we want you to do it again. It was crazy. Obviously, I've covered the league for several decades, but to be in a position as a color analyst is something that I had never done before. And look, we think the most important thing is that we were ourselves. We were not trying to be Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. That's comical. I wasn't trying to be Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth, my wonderful former colleagues at NBC. That's ridiculous to think that. We were providing a different kind of broadcast. We're in 200 countries, so you're not sure who's listening, but chances are some people who really don't know about football. So, one of the things that I made really a priority was, not just to sit here and use this football lingo that exists, but to make sure that I'm explaining what I'm talking about and to make it clear what people are seeing as they watch the broadcast along with us. And it was terrific. And I like to think I've worked hard in my career. Nothing like this ever. I mean, it was unbelievable. And you kind of feel just like the teams in the sense that game day is your best day. It's your most fun day, and the rest of the week. And it's a short week, believe me, on Thursday Night Football. It's a ton of preparation, but the teams were great with us in terms of our production meetings, and I loved it. And it was, it's certainly such a great compliment to something like real sports, something so totally different. But I'm pretty proud that I was able to do it, and I get to do it again next season. So thanks for asking about that.
Yeah, no problem at all. And best of luck in the next season, and looking forward to watching the story. Again, HBO Real Sports Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Check it out. HBO Real Sports are on your streaming platforms, HBO Go or HBO Now after it airs. Andrea Kremer, thanks for the time.
Thank you, Chris. Great conversation. Appreciate the terrific questions, and hope you and your listeners enjoy the story, and happy to join you again in the future.
And that's Andrea Kremer here on the 5 Reasons podcast. Again, check out that piece that is going to run on HBO Real Sports, and also check out our 5 Rings podcast here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network on the University of Miami. Just recently added to our 5 Rings podcast on the University of Miami with a couple of contributors. Andrew Ivins, who's long been a part of the pod as kind of the recruiting expert, but also is going to be joined by David Lake of Inside the U to kind of go more week to week, analyzing the current team and everything that's going on, while Josh Darrow, the usual host of the podcast, will continue to be involved with that stuff, but also will kind of take a more holistic view of the program of both the past, current, and future. So a lot to cover on the University of Miami. Check out the 5 Rings podcast, but also I do want to mention again, 5reasonsports.com. We are not long away from the launch of our site. All of our great contributors in the network, like Nikias Duncan from Miami Heatbeat, and Alf, and Christian Hernandez, and Giancarlo Navas, and Brian Goins, and Alex Toledo, and then you have Chris Maddox as well from Light Skinned Opinions, Chris Joseph from Ballscast, CK from 3 Yards Per Carry. All of our contributors in the 5 Reasons Sports Network will be prominently featured in our site with daily writing. We'll also have the latest news and information as well in the world of South Florida sports. And as we always mention, we do this for free. No price to subscribe to the podcast. No price to follow our great content on social media. No price to read our website. We are totally free on the website, and some terrific content is on the way as well. So again, I don't know what it is you do. I mean, me personally, I'm on reading apps all day. I'm on, the New York Times app. We don't have an app yet. Maybe we'll have to work on that. But however it is you are reading your content now, 5reasonsports.com. Please bookmark it. Please be ready to check that out in about a week's time as we're ramping up to launch. And, of course, check out all the podcasts in the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I don't feel like we really give all of them their due love, so I'm actually going to try and do this off the top of my head. We have a lot of podcasts here in the 5 Reasons Sports Network. So, again, check out 3 Yards Per Carry and the Fish Tank on the Miami Dolphins. 3 Yards Per Carry, going to be doing some amazing NFL draft analysis on the ramp up to the NFL draft, telling you who the Dolphins need to pick, although really with CK, it's just Kyler Murray. But, I mean, we'll see if Kyler Murray even gets beyond 1 and what the Dolphins end up doing at 13. The Fish Tank, some terrific stories as well. They've had some great guests of late. I particularly was a fan of their Harvey Green episode, but, I mean, some great. Ronnie Brown was in the Fish Tank recently. Trick Daddy, who was just featured on Love and Hip Hop. We have a show that was featured on VH1. Incredible. So check that out. Swings and Mishes on the Miami Marlins. Opening day is coming up this week, so definitely do check out Swings and Mishes. They did an episode yesterday, on the day of posting this, on the Marlins roster cuts and what they're doing on the brink of spring training. Miami Heat beat. Miami Heat look on their way towards the playoffs. Still have to ward off the challenges of Orlando and Charlotte, but obviously Miami Heat beat will be covering a potential Miami Heat playoff series. Goalie on ice on the Florida Panthers. We mentioned the 5 Rings Canes podcast. How could I forget my own podcast, Pitch Invasion, covering Inter Miami and everything else in the world of soccer. Cinco Razones, Out for the Count, Fantasy on 5, Balls Cast, Light Skinned Opinions, Chamber Podcast, and last but not least, the pod that I am beefing with, Smark Your Territory, on the world of professional wrestling. So check out all the content we've got churning out, both in podcast form and in digital form, in the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for listening to today's episode, and do subscribe to the program on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the 5 Reasons Podcast. Thank you so much.